Jagadan was a name that struck fear into the hearts of the people. He rose to power with grand promises of change and prosperity, convincing the people that he was their savior. Charismatic and cunning, Jagadan knew how to manipulate the masses with his words. But once he gained control, his true nature was revealed. At first, the people believed in him. Roads were patched, schools reopened, and healthcare centers began operating again. Jagadan's face was plastered on every wall, his name chanted in the streets. But beneath the surface, corruption was brewing. Jagadan had no intention of serving the people. He saw power as a tool for personal gain. Tax collections skyrocketed, but the funds disappeared into thin air. Public services began to deteriorate, and whispers of missing government funds spread through the villages. Jagadan's ministers, handpicked from his circle of loyal friends, lived in obscene luxury. Expensive cars lined the government quarters while the people struggled to afford a meal a day. Jagadan built himself a sprawling mansion atop the hill, overlooking the impoverished capital. From his balcony, he would sip the finest wines imported from overseas, watching the struggling crowds below with indifference. He imposed harsh penalties on dissent, silencing journalists and imprisoning political opponents. His security forces roamed the streets, intimidating anyone who dared to speak against him. One day, a young activist named Ayo emerged as a voice for the people. Ayo had grown up in the slums, witnessing firsthand the suffering Jagadan's greed had caused. He began to organize peaceful protests, rallying the people to demand accountability. His words ignited a fire among the citizens, and soon the streets were filled with thousands of angry voices calling for Jagadan's resignation. Jagadan responded with violence, ordering his forces to crush the protests. But the people had reached their breaking point. The soldiers, many of whom had families suffering under Jagadan's rule, began to turn against him. One by one, his allies abandoned him. His ministers fled the country as the people stormed the government house. Jagadan, once untouchable, was dragged from his palace and forced to face the people he had betrayed. The people demanded justice, but instead of resorting to violence, they handed him over to a newly formed tribunal. Jagadan stood before a court of the very citizens he had oppressed, stripped of his power and wealth. Ayo was appointed as the leader of an interim government. His first act was to redirect the stolen funds back into public services. Schools reopened, hospitals were stocked, and roads were repaired. The people finally tasted freedom and prosperity. Jagadan, now a shadow of his former self, sat in a small prison cell, listening to the sounds of construction and laughter outside. He realized too late that true power lies in the hands of the people, not in gold or fear, but in unity and justice.